Hey guys, so there's a couple of topics I wanted to go over and talk about today. Just some interesting stuff I felt was worth discussing. So in my last video, we talked about how several things had listed Apex Legends coming to the Nintendo Switch on February 2nd, though nothing had been officially announced yet. Amazon Japan had the game listed as releasing February 2nd, and there was a Japanese YouTube video that also listed the game releasing that same day. February 2nd was the start of Apex Legends Season 8, so it made sense the game might release for Switch to coincide with the release of the newest season. But again, we hadn't heard anything official yet. The game's director, Chad Grenier, said details about the game's launch for Nintendo Switch would be coming very soon. So there was some speculation if maybe February 2nd really was the release date for Apex Legends for Switch, could also be the day for like a partner showcase or even a full-on Nintendo Direct or something, and the game's release date would be officially announced during that hypothetical presentation or something. However, instead on the 2nd we got a tweet from Nintendo of America, "Get ready to show them what you're made of when Apex Legends arrives on March 9th. Legendary loot awaits #Nintendo Switch players when they drop into @PlayApex Season 8 Mayhem." So it looks like the game is releasing on March 9th and not February 2nd, though we did get the game's release date announced on February 2nd, so at least there was that. Anyway, sadly there was no presentation from Nintendo here, so we once again have to continue to wait on our long-lost Nintendo Directs to return to us. Luckily, it does seem like there might actually be a light at the end of the tunnel here, and Nintendo Directs might still be a thing in our future. Nintendo of America has posted some job listings that you can read about online, and they have a list titled Description of Duties for exactly what those jobs entail. If we read down the list, one of the descriptions here stands out, as it reads, "May assist with filming live action footage for use in Nintendo Directs and other content marketing initiatives." Okay, so right here we have in a current job description from Nintendo that they're looking to hire people who can assist with Nintendo Directs. They use the term Nintendo Directs here. So hopefully this is a good sign and means Nintendo Directs are still something Nintendo plans on doing and are actively hiring people to help be involved with. Now I should point out there is the possibility that this description was just copy and pasted from some older job description listings or something, and they didn't bother rewriting it and changing the phrasing here. So maybe Nintendo is totally done with doing Nintendo Directs, and that's the only reason why this job description has Nintendo Direct in it. They just sort of copy and pasted from some old job listing. We can only hope that isn't the case, as I'd really hate to see Nintendo devolve their announcements to just random Twitter posts and shadow dropped smaller presentations like the partner showcases and stuff. I think absolutely every Nintendo fan out there really loved the Nintendo Direct format and anxiously awaits a return to form in the future. Hopefully, if this job description is up to date, we won't have to wait too long and we'll get a true classic-style Nintendo Direct at some point here. Nintendo has yet to really lay out their plans for 2021, and a nice spring Nintendo Direct would be a welcome surprise one of these months. Alright, so next up, just something pretty interesting to discuss about our most recent Smash Bros. Event. The latest announced upcoming event is titled Ballistic Barrage, and it says, "Projectiles will be flying every which way in this limited time tourney, open only to fighters who possess 3 or more projectile attacks. The further you advance, the better the spirit you'll win." So this is a projectile user-themed tourney event, specifically characters with 3 or more projectiles. So basically, they're talking about characters that are typically called zoners, the type of characters that have a lot of projectiles, and projectile attacks are generally their focus and a big part of their moveset and playstyle. The reason this event is somewhat noteworthy is that having this event now might mean that the rest of the past does not have a projectile-focused fighter. If we did have a character on the way that used 3 or more projectiles, the type of character who focuses on projectiles with their moveset, it would make more sense to save this event until after that character was revealed. We went down a similar path with our thoughts for some earlier events, like the lightweight event called Float Like a Butterfly, which we assumed meant that the remaining fighters wouldn't be the absolute bottom of the tier lightweights. Or even more on point, the Up Close and Personal event, which only had characters with no projectiles, and we assumed our remaining fighters would have at least 1 projectile attack, and so far that's been true. If we combine those parameters with our latest Ballistic Barrage event, then we could assume the remaining fighters do have projectiles in their moveset, but have less than 3, so they aren't projectile-focused fighters. So, assumedly characters like, say, Dante from Devil May Cry, or Ryo Hayabusa from Ninja Gaiden, who would likely have at least a projectile in their attack, but those style attacks wouldn't dominate their movesets, would probably fall into this category of still being on the table. The vast majority of characters on the roster tend to have at least one projectile, even when it isn't the focus of their moveset. So this would really just count out characters without projectiles and characters with a large amount of their moveset focused on projectiles. However, this is just a theory, and I'll fully admit this train of thought is a bit flawed, as we have had some events that a character we got later could have fit into. For example, the different eras of gaming have had events, and if we used those events to count out characters, there'd be nearly no choices left. In fact, Sephiroth happened after the 90s event, which he clearly could have been a part of. So events happening that could fit for future fighters does not mean that future fighters that could fit that event are completely out of the running. So since we've already had things like Sephiroth breaking this theory being a 90s character that was released after the 90s event, why is this worth talking about? Well, if we do have a projectile-focused fighter as one of our remaining 3 characters in the Fighter's Pass, it would still make sense to me to save this particular event, a projectile-themed event, for after their release instead of right now. For instance, someone like Doomguy. If projectiles are a big part of their theme, then I think it would make sense to not do this event right now. To be more specific and perfectly frank with what I'm getting at here, it's really the possibility of a first-person shooter rep or a shooter rep in general, someone from that genre of games that I'm sort of doubting now. A character from the FPS genre, the genre that is all about projectiles, would make sense to give the projectile event to. It would almost certainly be their theme if they were part of the remaining fighters in the Fighter's Pass. So characters like Doomguy or Master Chief would likely have lots of projectiles, and that would factor majorly into their playstyle and be a huge part of their moveset and their character's theme. They'd be our first character from the first-person shooter genre, so I'd expect projectiles to be sort of what they're all about and probably what makes them stand out in this Fighter's Pass. So that's what I'd expect their event would be about. It would just make sense projectiles would be the theme for a shooter character. Again, this logic is somewhat flawed, as I pointed out, Sephiroth being released after the 90s theme event, but still, Sephiroth's theme doesn't have to be his gaming era. The theme I'd immediately think of for Sephiroth wouldn't be that he's from the 90s. Whereas conversely, with a shooter rep, someone like Doomguy or Master Chief, projectiles would be the first thing I'd think of for their theme. When it came to Sephiroth, they went with shadows and darkness as his theme, so, focusing on the fact that he's a villain. And I'm sure people could come up with non-projectile themes for characters like Master Chief or Doomguy, but still, I think the obvious theme for a projectile first-person shooter character, if we got one in this pass, would be to do the event as a projectile event. So I do think this event happening now is a bit of a hit against such a character happening in this pass. Not impossible by any means, but a first-person shooter rep is a tad less likely now, if you ask me. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd absolutely love to get Doomguy or Master Chief. I feel like a shooter rep is something we have missing from the roster, and something that would help Smash feel like a celebration of gaming overall if it got into the game at some point. But I can't help but feel like a projectile-themed event would be saved for such a character, so I'm a little doubtful now. Okay, so the final thing I want to talk about today is this rumor about how apparently there is going to be some sort of stop-motion Star Fox something and a live-action Zelda show on Netflix, but supposedly both of these got canceled by Nintendo. This is all coming from an interview with Adam Conover, who you might be familiar with from the show Adam Ruins Everything, though Adam doesn't seem to be the one who ruined these shows. I've never watched Adam Ruins Everything, so I don't know that much about Adam Conover. I just know him as the annoying guy who I see his commercials during the breaks while I'm watching Impractical Jokers. I met Joe at Comic-Con one time, actually. He's a really cool dude, but anyway, I digress. So Adam Conover was interviewed on a YouTube channel called The Surf Times, and in the interview he divulged some information about his time working at College Humor. Apparently, College Humor had planned a claymation skit in the style of Fantastic Mr. Fox, but for Star Fox, and they actually had Sejiro Miyamoto show up at their office to discuss plans for it. Sounds sort of similar to the Star Fox Puppet E3 stuff we had a few years back, and apparently this was happening around 2015, so same time frame. Adam caught word that this was happening and was interested in wanting to meet Miyamoto, but I guess it never happened. His boss didn't let him or something. Anyway, he later found out that the whole thing ended up being canceled, and he asked his boss what had happened to it, and his boss told him, "Oh, someone at Netflix leaked the Legend of Zelda thing. They weren't supposed to talk about it. Nintendo freaked out, and they pulled the plug on everything. They pulled the plug on the entire program to adapt these things." I actually do recall hearing rumors about a Netflix Zelda show many years back, and a quick Google search did dig up some articles stating just as much. Back then I figured it was just a rumor, and then when nothing came of it, I assumed it had just been that, just rumors. But if we're to believe Adam Kahn over here, I guess the live-action Zelda Netflix show was actually going to be a thing, but apparently because it leaked, Nintendo canceled it, and also stopped whatever that claymation, stop-motion Star Fox project they were doing with College Humor was as well. So that's a huge bummer. Hearing about this right after hearing a Crash Bandicoot animation was canceled by Amazon seriously sucks. I'm a fan of all three of these things, and would love to have seen them get shows, especially The Legend of Zelda. I grew up with the old Zelda cartoon show, and it was not the best Zelda adaptation, so it's really sad to hear another shot at adapting the Zelda series nearly happened but got canceled. I do think it's a bit strange Nintendo would cancel the project simply because it leaked. As someone who talks a lot about leaks and stuff, I think that's a little silly of a reason to cancel a project entirely. Honestly, when something leaks, it's usually because people are so excited about it that they feel it's worth leaking and telling other people about. It shows there's an audience out there that's very eager to see this show happen. Anyway, I guess it must have leaked extremely early and probably not very far along into development. So maybe Nintendo was just lukewarm about the whole thing to begin with, and when it leaked out, they decided that was the time to just cancel everything, and Netflix wasn't worth working with since, stuff could leak from them or whatever. Nintendo decided to pull the plug very early. I don't know for sure if any of this is actually legit, but maybe Nintendo will rethink doing something like that with the Zelda IP in the future, as I'd love to get Zelda adapted into a series or a movie or something. Personally, I'd rather go animated than live action, but hey, I'd be happy to see either. Alright, well that's everything I wanted to talk about in this video. Maybe all of us gamers can pool our recently acquired millions of dollars from our GameStop stock and entice Nintendo to actually make some live action Zelda show or something. Anyway, if you guys have any thoughts or comments about any of the stuff I talked about in this video, leave them below. So once again, thank you guys for all the subscribes, all the likes, really helps out the channel. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do so, or like the video, or leave a comment, whatever you want. Until next time, have a good one.